1 minute. Okay. Okay. In fact, from next week, I'll send people a code that you can just join in automatically. You don't have to wait for me to let you in.
Yeah, I think people are still joining, Rabbi, so maybe just give a few minutes.
Okay, I'll give it a few seconds, a minute or two. Sorry about tonight, guys. Had the wrong connection. Okay. I think we can start, eh? So, good evening, everybody. And let's say as follows. We're going through Pirkei Avos. I will give you a bit more background as we get through, but I want to get straight into it. We're doing the second Mishnah today. Now, there's 60 volumes of Mishnah. There are 60 volumes of Mishnah. The one volume that teaches you how to be a mensch. It doesn't tell you the laws of Rosh Hashanah. It doesn't tell you the laws of Yom Kippur. The book that teaches you how to be a mensch is none other than Pirkei Avos, which is important to know because at any age you can transform your life. And the second Mishnah, so the first Mishnah taught us you have to have a dream in life. Whatever it is, you have to have a dream. Whether you want to achieve something in life, you want to fix up a character flaw, whatever it is, you have to have a dream. And then it gave you a 5-step program of how to transform your life. We said it last week. You need humility. You have to be able to listen more than you talk. You have to be diligent and consistent and persevere. You have to always see the bigger picture in life. You have to see the unintended consequence, and you have to go make a difference in life. That was the 5-step program that we spoke about last week. Today we go to the second Mishnah, and this is the last of the men of the Great Assembly. Who were the men of the Great Assembly? I explained it last week. They were the people who came back after the destruction of the first temple, after Darius, Queen Esther's son, allowed the Jewish people to go back and rebuild the temple. These great sages came to Israel and they saw everything was destroyed. And there was a lack of knowledge, there was a lot of assimilation, and they rebuilt Yiddishkeit. That's why they were called great. Because if you have all the money in the world and you're not sharing it, if you have all the knowledge in the world and you're not sharing it, you're not great. Great is when you make a difference in the world. Good. Now, the very last of the men of the Great Assembly was none other than Shimon HaTzadik. Now, Shimon HaTzadik lived 325 years before Common Era. Okay. He was the last of the men of the Great Assembly, and he was a Kohen. He was the high priest. He lived to be 120 years of age. Let's just quickly read through the Mishnah and then we'll explain it. Shimon HaTzadik, I sent you the text today. Shimon HaTzadik, he was of the last of the men of the Great Assembly. Okay. Now, Hu Hayoime, he used to say. What does it mean he used to say? If the Mishnah says the words he used to say, it means two things. Number one, he inculcated. He lived with this saying. He lived with it. He practiced it. He didn't just teach it. He lived it. And two, he would often say it. So he would often say the following statement. Al shlosha dvarim ha'olam omed. The world stands on 3 pillars. Torah, avodah, ugmilas chasadim. Torah, whatever that means. Avodah, service to God, whatever that means, and acts of goodness and kindness. Okay, that's what he said. Now let's explain the Mishnah. First of all, who was Shimon HaTzadik? So as I said, he was the last of the men of the Great Assembly. He was the high priest of the time. He lived till 120, but something amazing happened to him. When Persia fell, after King Cyrus died, Alexander the Great of Macedonia, he was conquering the world. And he was in Egypt, and he was coming to Israel, and he was actually coming to destroy the temple. Alexander the Great died very young, but he was very successful in his short life. Anyways, he was coming to Israel. The Samaritans had told him to destroy the temple, and he was on the way to destroy the temple. Anyways, he's coming with his army. Shimon HaTzadik, Shimon the high priest, hears that Alexander the Great is coming to destroy the temple. So what does he do? The Gemara says as follows. The Talmud says he puts on his priestly garments, and together with his entourage travels the whole night until he meets up. Just imagine the scene, until he meets up with Alexander the Great. And as soon as Alexander the Great sees him, he jumps off his horse and he bows to Shimon HaTzadik. His generals say, why are you bowing to the Jew? He says, you cannot believe. Listen to the story. Whenever I go into battle, I see the vision of a holy man, of a man. This is the man I see who leads me in battle when I'm victorious. They became very, very close. In fact, at one time, Alexander the Great wanted to put a statue of himself in the temple because he was very good to the Jews. And Shimon HaTzadik said that wouldn't be a good idea. Rather, let's all the Kohanim that are going to be born this year, let's name them Alexander. And that's how the name Alexander became a Jewish name, by the way. Okay. Now, he was called Shimon HaTzadik. Now, what does the word tzaddik mean? So one of the definitions of tzaddik, everybody thinks tzaddik is a... Lady can't get in, I don't know why. Everybody thinks that tzaddik is a learned person, a good person, much, much more. Tzaddik is somebody who is absolutely godly. Now, when we're born with good and bad. A tzaddik has no evil within him whatsoever. Not that he controls his thoughts. He has no evil. In his heart is only good. He lives like he is in heaven. Godliness is totally revealed for him. He can see from one side of the world to the other. They tell the story with the Masinter Magid, that he could see the whole world in front of him, and he put on glasses to see the person standing in front of him. I'll tell you another story about a tzaddik, the third Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek. A lady came, I'm going to cut the story short, a lady came, she was an aguna, she couldn't find her husband, and therefore she couldn't get married. Her husband disappeared. She came with her deaf and dumb child. The kid was born deaf and dumb. She came to Lubavitch to see if the Tzemach Tzedek, the third Lubavitcher Rebbe, could help find her husband. To cut a long story short, without knowing, the little kid walked in to see the third Lubavitcher Rebbe. The third Lubavitcher Rebbe looked at the kid and said, "Go and tell your mother your father can be found in such and such a place." The kid came out, told his mother that, and from then on was able to speak. When they went to the Tzemach Tzedek and said, "You're a miracle maker, how did you do that?" He said, "How was I supposed to know that the child was deaf and dumb?" When a tzaddik decrees, God listens. A tzaddik is absolutely godly. They live with heaven on earth. Right. So Shimon HaTzadik was, out of all the Kohanim and all the high priests, he was the only one that was called Shimon HaTzadik, like Yosef HaTzadik, Yosef of the Torah. Absolutely godly, no evil whatsoever. That was Shimon HaTzadik. The Gemara says about him that when he was alive, there were a whole bunch of open miracles that took place in the temple. So, for example, every single day they would offer sacrifices on the altar. As long as he was alive, they never had to put extra wood on the altar. It just lasted. As long as he was alive, one of the lights of the menorah, the candelabra in the temple, never went out. And there were a whole bunch of other miracles that they experienced while Shimon HaTzadik was alive. In fact, the Gemara tells the story that on the last year of his life, he walked into the Holy of Holies in Yom Kippur, and he walked out and he said, "This year I'm going to die." A day later he got sick, and a week later he died. And they said, "How do you know?" He said, "Every time when I go into the Holy of Holies, I see a saintly looking man dressed in white. He goes in with me and he comes out with me. This year there was a man dressed in black there and he didn't come out with me." I think the takeaway message for all of us in the shiur from that little story is that when you see darkness, when you see black, that's when you know it's over. You've always got to find opportunity. You've always got to see the light at the end of the tunnel. Anyways, Shimon HaTzadik said that the world exists on three pillars. What does that mean? The world exists on three pillars. So, let me clarify. When God gave the Jewish people, when God created the world, Adam and Eve were created on Friday. The whole commandment not to eat from the fruit of the tree of knowledge was only for 3 hours. So why they ate the fruit, we'll discuss another time. But anyways, they ate the fruit of the tree of knowledge. The whole commandment was only for 3 hours. As a result of that, God took them out of the Garden of Eden, and a whole bunch of things happened. Suffering, death, sickness, women suffering during pregnancy, etc., etc. All happened as a result of Adam and Eve eating from the fruit of the tree of knowledge. If Adam and Eve wouldn't have eaten from the fruit of the tree of knowledge, what would have happened? All our souls would have descended on that day, and heaven. Let's put infrared glasses on. Let's look beyond this physical world. There are a whole bunch of spiritual worlds that are far more real than this world. Heaven would have descended on this earth. And what we would have done is we would have delved into spirituality. Now, we know very little about our universe, actually. What do we know? We don't even know if there's life on other planets. There probably is life on other planets. We haven't even explored it properly. So can you imagine the spiritual worlds, this infinite wisdom of the spiritual worlds? I'll give you an analogy to explain what I mean. If you would have told a kid 300 years ago, kid, one day you're not going to want to play with a bow and arrow. You're going to want to sit in front of one of these flat screens and just watch it all day. They would have thought you nuts. The truth of the matter is, when the spiritual worlds open up to us, you'll see that there's infinite wisdom. And even somebody who passed away 2,500 or 3,000 years ago is still growing every single day in heaven. It's very Levitic. It's very exciting in heaven, by the way. We'll discuss that another time. But anyways, heaven would have descended to earth, and that's what we would have done. Because Adam and Eve ate from the fruit of the tree of knowledge, God said, okay, new program. It's going to be a whole different ball game. For the first 2,448 years of creation, heaven stayed in heaven, earth stayed in earth. There were two different domains. Then God gave the Jewish people, or gave the world, the Ten Commandments and the Torah. What did that allow? Digest these thoughts. It allowed physical to become spiritual. Until the giving of the Torah, the heavens were the heavens, the earth was the earth. From the time God gave the Jewish people the Torah, now we can make physical spiritual. Every single time we do a mitzvah, we're using something physical. We put up a mezuzah, it's animal skin. We take the animal, we're elevating it. Slowly but surely, we're injecting more godliness into the world. And eventually, when Mashiach comes, we'll just open our eyes, we won't be blind, and we'll see godliness. We'll see how actually God is everything, and everything is God, and God is everywhere. Good. Now, when a group of people on a Tuesday evening give up 20 minutes of their time to learn Torah, what really is happening? Now let's think about what the Torah is. The Torah is not just a history book. The Torah was written before God created the world. It's the architectural plan that God created the world with. God took this infinite wisdom that's infinite, that transcends us, and he squashed it into a book called the Torah. So ingenious is it that a child of 5 can read it and comprehend the story. A Kabbalist can read the same sentence that the kid reads and learn something completely different. But what's really happening? We are bringing godliness, infinite God, through all the spiritual worlds that are beyond this world, into this physical world. It's coming into our brains. Our brains are enveloping the concept that we're learning. The concept is being enveloped by our brain. It's becoming one with our brain. We are becoming godly, and it's illuminating the entire world. So if you want to bring heaven to earth, learn Torah. If you want to push away an evil decree, learn Torah. And that's why the Torah, we'll learn later in the Mishnah. The 10 people that sit and learn Torah are pushing away calamities. You're bringing down a godly radiance. It's unbelievable. So when we learn Torah, it's one of the pillars. We're looking for the pillars of what makes this world work. What makes this world go round is a group of people learning Torah. It brings heaven to earth. How do we lift earth to heaven? So when the temple stood in Jerusalem, there were sacrifices. Now, sacrifices sound barbaric until you've really learned the meaning of it. Now, anything living is going to die. When an animal dies on the altar as a sacrifice to God, God says, Reich Nechayach. It's a beautiful odor. I love it when physical becomes spiritual. So when the animal was offered on the altar, what really was happening is the entire animalistic world, the entire world was being elevated. Physical was becoming spiritual. That's the second pillar. So Torah brings godliness down to this world. Sacrifices, which is now replaced by prayer, lifts the physical world. And all of a sudden, the physical world is becoming more godly. And then, when a person goes and does acts of goodness and kindness, which is not necessarily charity, by the way, because you can give charity and be nasty. Now, you can throw the coin at a person. Charity means that you're kind. You visit the sick. You help the poor. You open your home. That's acts of goodness and kindness, and that manifests God in the world. So if you want godliness to be revealed in this world, if you want sickness and suffering to go away, these are the 3 pillars that make the world go round. Good. Now, when Shimon HaTzadik was speaking about the world, which world was he referring to? Well, there are 2 worlds. If I'm a Martian standing from outer space and I'm looking, I see the earth. The earth has dry land and the earth has sea. I can see the dry land, it's the mountains, it's the animals, it's the people on the earth. But then I see the sea and I can't see what's inside the sea. Human being is called a small world. And just like the world has a dry land, you have my mannerisms and the way I talk, what you see about me. But there's also the sea. You can't see my insecurities and all that's going on inside of me, both good and bad. And maybe, by the way, that's the concept of splitting of the Red Sea. Splitting the sea, let the real you come out. Okay. When Shimon HaTzadik was speaking about the world stands on 3 pillars, first of all, he was basing himself in history. Because why did God destroy the world with the flood? Why did God wash the world and recreate the world, so to speak? Because man at that time was not studying Torah. When you study Torah, you allow yourself, you strengthen yourself to overpower your weaknesses. When you don't do that, you can fall into sin and be promiscuous. God forbid. If you're not serving God, man has to worship something. And believe it, we're either worshipping money, we're worshipping our boss, we're worshipping time, we're worshipping what people say, but we're worshipping something. At the time of the flood, they weren't worshipping God, they were worshipping everything else. Things was just so good before the flood. There weren't any seasons, and there was just a lot of wealth. I think all trees bore fruit at the time. It was just too easy. And man started to worship idols. So on the one hand, they were promiscuous. On the other hand, they were worshipping idols, and they were backstabbing. Shvichas domim. They were backstabbing, they were murdering, they were robbing, etc., etc. As a result of that, God said, the world doesn't have the pillars, I have to flood the world. So he based himself on facts in the Torah, but he was also speaking about all of us, the human being. If we want our lives to flourish, we need these three pillars. When we're learning Torah, it gives us the ability, the strength, the knowledge to overcome our weaknesses within. When we're worshipping God, what are we doing? We're sacrificing ourselves to God. We're uplifting ourselves to God. And when we're doing acts of goodness and kindness, we're manifesting God in everything. But if we're not doing that, you see, life is not a step. Life is not a staircase. It's a ramp. You're either going up or you're going down. You don't stay in the middle. And that's what Shimon HaTzadik was saying. If you're not working on yourself every day to better yourself through Torah, if you're not worshipping God, and if you are backstabbing, eventually your entire life will fall away. Now, I started a little bit late, so I'm going to keep you 3 more minutes. And that, by the way, is this mission over here. If you want your life to flourish, have set aside once a week, every day for a few minutes to learn Torah. Pray to God. Does prayer help? I'll tell you how prayer helps. I challenge anybody here. Go to somebody tomorrow morning and say, why don't you give me 5 rand? The person might be a little bit offended at you, but they'll give you the money. Why? Because you asked. Now, chances are they'll give it to you. Because you asked them, they'll give it to you. When you turn to God, you say, please, God, I'm offering myself. Please help me. God will respond. And when you acts of goodness and kindness, you reflect God. Just on speaking of sacrifices, by the way, in the olden days, they offered the animal on the altar. Today, it's the animal within us. Some of us are a goring ox. Ox has lots of energy. You can either use it to destroy a bull in a china shop, or you can plow any fields. And you find the animal within you and you sacrifice that to God, you better yourself. God says, I love that when a person sacrifices himself to me. We'll elaborate more on that in another share as well. I just want to end off, by the way, when I told you the story about Alexander the Great with Shimon HaTzadik. I want to end off with a story. So Alexander the Great said, when I go out to battle, I see this man's vision in front of me. That's recorded in the Gemara. The 5th Lubavitcher Rebbe was born in 1860. He died in 1920. Okay? He lived in Lubavitch. Now let me tell you a story about a doctor. There was a religious doctor who lived somewhere in Russia. And he was very religious, and he decided he was never going to work on Shabbos, even though you can save a life on Shabbos. His thing was, he had a locum. He didn't want to break Shabbos. He had a non-Jewish locum. Anyways, one time he's sleeping on Shabbos afternoon and he has a strange dream. A saintly looking man, comes to him and says, listen, I know it's your custom not to break Shabbos, to save for any reason, but if you can save a life, break Shabbos. Lo and behold, there's a knock on the door while he's sleeping on Shabbos afternoon. It's a guy there, please, my kid is very sick, please, I need you to help. His first thought was, please go to my locum. And then he remembered his dream and said, you know what, I'm going to come. And he saves the kid. That's the story. A few months later, there was a medical conference in Vitebsk, and he travels to the medical conference. Vitebsk is near the town of Lubavitch, so he decides to go to Lubavitch to see the famous 5th Lubavitcher Rebbe. He goes to Lubavitch, he gets an audience with the 5th Lubavitcher Rebbe, and he walks in, and he almost faints. And he says to the Rebbe Rashab, you were the man who came to me in my dream. And the 5th Lubavitcher Rebbe just smiled. Now, why I say that is the power of a tzaddik. Now, when we learn the Mishnah now with Shimon HaTzadik, Shimon HaTzadik is aware, he's learning this Mishnah with us. That's the amazing thing. That's the Bluetooth of spirituality. But I've already run out of time. So we please God, we will learn the next Mishnah next week. And I hope you enjoyed it. Cheers, guys. I'm out of time.
Thank you.
Thank you.